I just want to introduce Alec Simon and Andrea Navratil from Magnet, who are going to talk today about value proposition. And I'll turn it over to you, Alec and Andrea, to take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us, Doug. And thanks for everyone for joining today. Just got about 45 minutes to an hour worth of content here. We'll go through it pretty quickly. But don't hesitate at any point to ask questions, give examples. I think Andrew might be asking for some from support later, so feel free to chime in. I'm just going to sort of contextualize what we're going to talk about today, then Andrew is really going to dive into the meat of it. So for those of you that haven't heard of Magnet, I'll just give a really quick rundown as to who we are, so you know who are these two random people that are talking to you. So Magnet, we're a nonprofit in Northeast Ohio supporting manufacturing. So we've been doing that for almost 40 years. Three key pillars of that. We've got our growth services team that work with small and medium-sized manufacturers every day to help them with their sales, marketing, and strategy, with their doing lean operations. We've got engineers on our staff that build custom machinery. We do product development. We do all sorts of stuff with small and medium-sized manufacturers. We did a ton with PPE. We spun up a number of manufacturers to make over 1 million face shields, 1 million face masks, isolation gowns, testing booths. We did a lot of work around PPE. We also have a workforce development team that's working to fill a skills gap in Northeast Ohio. So there are a lot of manufacturers that are looking to grow, and there are a lot of people looking for jobs, but the manufacturers don't necessarily have people to fill those jobs. So we're really trying to bridge the gap between manufacturers that are looking to hire and folks that are out there that are looking for jobs but haven't either considered manufacturing or don't even know that don't have the requisite skills for manufacturing. So we try and do some upskilling programs. We do some programs with the CMSD students. We've got a number of we got one big program with CMSD and a number of other programs that we run throughout the community. And finally, the team that Andrea and I works for, which we'll talk a little bit about our methodology today. It's called the Iterator. And what we do with the Iterator is we help physical product innovators in Northeast Ohio take ideas and turn them into thriving businesses. And we use a lean startup methodology, which Andrea is going to talk more about in a minute. So what we're going to talk about today is three things. These three things really core to what Andrea and I do every day with startups. So at any given time, we're working with 20 to 25 different startups on doing these three things. Number one, describing how and why your idea might create value. What is it about your idea that's going to go make money? Two, identify the guesses you're making. Entrepreneurship and innovation of all kind is built on assumptions and guesses. So we'd like to unpack those guesses in some sort of structured way so that we can go out and test those guesses. So the last thing is, how do we experiment with those assumptions? How do we go and look and say, okay, we have our theory about what value might look like. We know the guesses that we're making. How do we go out and actually test if these are actually true? These assumptions are true. We actually are creating value for someone before we go and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars creating molds, or we spend tens of millions of dollars building a factory. How do we know that there's a there? How do we do that in a way that is cost effective, that is quick? How do we lean into innovation? So the first part of that is the value proposition. And for our purposes here, we define that as the offer a company makes to consumers that sets it apart from its competition. So this is really, why do people come to you? Why do they buy your product? Why is this something that people have to have in their lives? And we believe there's sort of four key parts to a value proposition, which Andrea is really going to dive into over the next few minutes and really dive deep, because this is sort of fundamental to everything that we think about. So I'll turn it over to her and let her kind of talk through that.
So we call this our value proposition matrix, and it's a framework that we use with all of our entrepreneurs and pretty much every day. And oftentimes the entrepreneur, first thing that they come to us with is a problem. And it's really thinking about, what problem are you solving? And everyone sees problems in their daily lives, in their work, their home, but really thinking about a problem in three ways is important. Is it solvable? Is it scalable? Is it significant? So thinking about, is it solvable? It's really about the granularity of which you're talking about the problem. So is it something that you can articulate a solution for? So a huge problem is things like world hunger, but those aren't things that necessarily most of us can solve. So thinking about, is it a solvable problem that you can address and you can think about that solution is important. The next thing is it scalable? And we kind of go back and forth on this one. So we want it to eventually be scalable, but the one thing that we also need to focus on is what we can do with it today and making sure that you have the adoption today. So as you're thinking about it, as what will be scalable, thinking about, is it a big problem that you can dive into the future, but are there steps that can get you there in the interim to start to understand, is this the right problem to solve? And then finally, is it significant? Is it a problem that is bothering people enough that they're willing to pay for it? That's the type of metric and proof that you're looking for when you're thinking about, is that problem significant? So one example, and we're working with entrepreneurs every day, one example is Octet. They identified a problem. They're in the chemical space, and they are looking to really push zinc batteries forward for many reasons of being sustainable and just being better for the temperature that they're at and things like that. But Octet identified a specific problem in that there were dendrites growing on the batteries when they would try to recharge a zinc battery. And they said, we understand chemicals. We can solve that problem. We think it's significant. We think people will pay for it. We think it's solvable because we have an idea of what chemicals together could create it. It could help to address this dendrite problem. And they think it's scalable. So they still have these big assumptions that they need to understand and test. And one of them is the adoption of zinc. But if zinc gets adopted, then it will be something that's scalable. So then that takes us to the next box, customer. So thinking about who will be your first customer. And first is really critical here. Lots of our entrepreneurs come to us and say, this solution is for everyone. And ideally, it probably will be down the road. But at first, you have to identify that customer with that really heightened problem who is willing to pay for this. Not only are they willing to pay for it, but they have such a problem with this, they're willing to accept the solution, even if it's not perfect. So we talk about prototypes that we'll get out in testing, and then also minimally viable products. Those products and those iterations aren't perfect. And you guys are used to that with all the software updates that we're constantly getting, right? They're a little bit better, but not always perfect. That's that first customer you want. You want somebody who will be willing to try that product without it being perfect. Also thinking about areas where established companies have kind of neglected a specific consumer group. So as you're thinking about your problem and looking at that customer, are there competitors that are out there that are being served by a different solution, but still have, but that customer, there's a customer group that has a different problem. So thinking about all of those is really important. One of our favorite examples for this is Cleveland Brownie. Obviously, there's tons of brownie companies out there, but they had a specific customer in mind. They were going after bodybuilders, and bodybuilders get to have a cheat day after their competitions, and they go for maximum amounts of calories and maximum amount of kind of a really sugary sweet options. So they wanted to come up with a brownie that includes Oreos and candy and just all kinds of different things. So Cleveland Brownie brought a new brownie to market specifically with this customer in mind. And they were able to kind of sell out initially because they were focused on solving one specific problem for this first specific customer.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that a little bit. Andrew, I think it's exactly right. I've talked to 500 startups over the last couple of years. I've never seen a startup with a more concrete first customer And what it meant is everything revolved around that. Everything was targeted at that customer, because that customer, no one else was going after them. They had relationships in that space, and they just fully put everything towards that customer. And since then, they've branched out, but they really got their footing by going after this customer who for 12 weeks straight would eat only chicken, rice, and vegetables. And one other thing I add is there's not a single product that launches, with very few exceptions, that aren't after some sort of initial customer. The iPhone was not for everybody. Every product is launched with someone in mind. So, sorry. Good.
That takes us to our solution. Again, here, if you look at what's in the box, what unique product or service are you offering? Unique is really important here. And we think about it around two areas. We think about it as, in what way are those alternatives out there similar, and which way are you different? So thinking about this, one of the things too that we hear often is, there are no competitors in this space. I'm the first one with this idea. But if you think about it, there's always some sort of competition. It might not be in that specific product category, but there's some solution. There's some people out there probably, if this is a big enough problem, hacking some sort of solution in that space. Or there might be an alternative in a service versus a product, or things like that. So thinking about who that competition is and how are you similar, so that you understand what is important about that problem and that customer and what they're doing. And then also, how are you different? So thinking about those points of parity and difference are really important. We have one client who is creating a specialized blanket that goes and attaches to both a stroller and a car seat. Now, if you go and look, there's lots of solutions people are using out there for blankets to cover up their kids so that they're either warm, or they can sleep, or they're covered from the sun. But this team has uncovered a specific need to have something that's a little bit more comfortable, a little bit that snaps and attaches to their strollers or car seats, and creates almost a tent effect where they can open and close it based on if the child's sleeping or not. It can protect them from the environment as well as protect them from germs. So they figured out how to, where that gap is that creates that opportunity that's both a difference as well as a point of similarity. So that client is called Flipboard. And then finally, you have your team and your assets. So in thinking about what are the special assets that your team has to offer, there is so much that can be contained in this square. It could be everything from legal things like contracts and trademarks that you already have. It could be the networks and the connections that you have. It could be background. It could be your understanding of a specific market. It could be the whole formulation of your team. It could be the types of people that you know, like influencers or things like that. All of those things are assets that your team is bringing to the market. So we always ask our entrepreneurs, why you? Why are you the one that can solve this specific problem and deliver it to the customer? So it's a lot about organizing and structuring. We have another great example of an entrepreneur we're working with, and they're looking for creating a way to find dead bodies. So
which is a crazy idea. Which is a crazy idea. We can't let that slide by not talking about it. They're looking for dead bodies underground. I call it a metal detector for dead bodies.
That's a great analogy. And so they have very specific people on their team. They have people who work with spectroscopy. They have scientists. They have specific people that are just focused on selling in the customer. They've been able to leverage and get capital. So they're bringing many different assets to the table. And that's why they think that they're the ones to bring this solution to market.
What they've also done is this team, so they've got scientists that are experts in this field, and they've got a CEO that's run 3 companies before. and they've got all these great people around them. They're also really good at identifying what they don't know. So they didn't have some engineering capability. So they came to us for our engineering help. They're like, we're going to bring this onto our team. They needed some accounting support. They brought accounting onto their team. They built out this well-rounded team, which they were able to do. But the special asset they really have is they know the science better than anybody. They built a team that's got all the skill sets that are really required to bring it to market. So.
All of this comes together to create that value proposition that Alex spoke to, that seemingly simple definition, but there's so much to it. So how does your solution solve the customer's problem in a novel way? Again, it has to solve a specific problem, be the solution for that customer, and also be novel. So again, a seemingly simple sentence, but with a lot to it.
And I'd add, this is a seemingly simple framework, but we've been with startups on a whiteboard for hours trying to nail down these 4. We ask people that are in there that have been running a business for years to fill out these 4 buckets, and they can't necessarily do it. They can't articulate their value proposition. It sounds so simple in elementary. It is really, really hard to do in practice. So we're going to go through a couple examples, but before that, does anyone have any questions? No, that's okay too.
So feel free to come off mute, but we're going to do an example. And this one is around Venmo. So hopefully all of you are familiar with it. Probably a lot of you have used it. And we're going to start with the problem. So can anyone take a guess at how to articulate the problem Venmo was trying to solve? So if you want to come off mute, if you want to think about, oh, there we got one. Make person-to-person payment easy. Any other things anyone would add? You can do it in the chat or you can do it live. All right, let's throw that problem up there. So yes, person-to-person payment, but one of the things that we talked about is what's that pain that that person is feeling. So adding that idea, that frustration of trying to split bills, especially when no one carries cash anymore. So there were some things out there that would allow payment from person to person, but that frustration of splitting bills, especially being like in the moment, having that mobile option right then and there was really what the founders of Venmo was a personal pain for them, that they thought, let's go ahead and test and see if there's others feeling that. How about anyone have a thought around customer?
I almost went too far. Okay.
Who was their first customer? And it's near and dear to a lot of your hearts.
People going to bars, possibly going out to eat, like younger people.
Yep, younger people, people at bars. College students that were sharing bills and expenses was their first customer. That was their early target. The founders were recent grads, and they had felt this pain both in college and then just recently. So college students are just recently out of school. How about in thinking about the solution? So what did they come up with that was novel solution for this problem?
Build their own platform that could handle transactions.
Yep, they created a mobile app to pay others that also engaged socially in shared experiences. So the one thing Venmo really did was not only make it, they were often paying each other in this early world around things like you mentioned at bars, different things where they're hanging out in college and things like that. So not only was it a financial transaction, but there was a social aspect to it, and something that they wanted to really tap into. So this college market also was very big into social and on social. So they thought that by bringing the two together, it'd make the idea of owing someone money a little less awkward as well. And then finally, any thoughts around what specific assets or why this team was able to bring this solution forward? Don't be shy.
This one's a tricky one. This one's a more tricky one. It's not quite as simple as some of the others.
We got a thought around PayPal connection.
So PayPal acquired Venmo, but not initially.
So the founders that created it had been freelancing in website design, in data analytics. So they really had the skills and assets. Plus they were tapped into this college market. So they were easily able to network with recent college grads and kind of understand where and how this group was communicating. So that brought it all together for their value proposition. It's a frictionless transfer of money mobilely while memorializing shared experiences. So what they uncovered and this problem and solution that they pulled forward to create was really about a pain point that was painful enough for these college students that they were willing to pay and they were willing to engage and try something new. And they were okay with the fact it wasn't perfect. So if you were on Venmo in the early days versus what it is today, it certainly has evolved a lot. But just keep in mind that those first versions are never perfect. But if you found the right customer and you have this right problem, everyone's okay with that because they have that pain point as well, and they're looking for a solution, and they're happy to pay you to solve it for them. So let's take another example. Oh, sorry, Alec, go ahead.
I was going to say PayPal acquired Venmo's holding company for $800 million. And Venmo is now one of the more, I think it'll be profitable starting next year. So it's gone 8 or 9 years without actually being cash flow positive, but it's a huge value driver for PayPal. If you just look at PayPal stock, it is through the roof because they've unlocked this really clear value proposition.
So
speaking
let's
of companies
try
that have done well.
We're going to talk a little bit about the value proposition of Quibby. Hopefully you've heard of Quibby. It launched about 6 months ago. If you haven't, it was a new type of way to watch media content. So let's just talk a little bit about the problem that they were trying to solve. Alec, you want to go ahead?
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, someone used to work with Meg Whitman. Do you have thoughts on it, Dr. Lim? All right. People don't have enough time. Very nice. People don't have enough time to watch full shows. So there was this problem. And they identified this opportunity to come up with a different solution. So we've seen in media the evolution from TVs to movies to online. Quibby decided that they wanted to be that next evolution. They wanted to provide and solve a problem where people don't have enough time to watch full shows. And then if we look at the customer that they were targeting, they were really focused on Gen Z and millennials and people that were on the go, specifically those commuters who had a little bit of time here and a little bit of time there, but never really that time opportunity to really dive into a full show as we know them today, or full movies, things like that.
Yeah, and the commuters are a really big part of it. There are tons of fun articles about Quibby and sort of why it failed, not to spoil anything here, but they were really going after commuters, and they were explicit about that. And they actually blamed the pandemic for part of the reason they failed, because people weren't commuting on trains or airplanes, or wherever they might be, or in Ubers. So they really did identify a niche they're really trying to start with.
So then the solution that they came up with was to create short chapter-like content, and they were going to tap into top Hollywood studios to get that content. So they were thinking that, with the problem being just these commuters without having time to watch these full shows, if they could make content that was ideal in short segments, that would be the perfect solution to how the evolution of media would happen. And that's much like how chapters in books happened. People couldn't sit down and read a whole book, so things started to evolve, and there was things got broken down into chapters, and people studied how long chapters should be and things like that. So they were going off of these same premises. So they were using a lot of understanding of the market and what they knew about content. And if we look at the team box, they certainly had a lot of great assets as well. They had Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman, both, Meg Whitman is a business guru. Jeffrey Katzenberg has worked with most of the major studios out there. So they had both. They had a person really focused on content, and then they had someone who really was focused on business. They were able to get a lot of capital to really address this problem. And it all came together for this value proposition. Quibby will provide the next evolution of media consumption with its on-the-go content. So it had everything going for them. But at this point, I'll let Alec take it over.
Yeah, so this looks great. Like, it looks like, well fleshed out value proposition, makes sense. Clear first customer, clear problem, clear solution, and clearly, the business guru, content genius, and all the capital in the world. Value proposition on its face makes sense. But that's what kind of leads into sort of the next part of the conversation, which is, what assumptions is this really relying on? And how do we systematically think about the assumptions that underpin this entire model that really hold it all together? Because if you didn't know, Quibby was just an absolute flop. It's become an internet term for just failure. There are a number of articles written about Quibby. One stat, they had about 900,000 subscribers join their free trial, which really is not a lot when they would launch at the fanfare that they did. About 70,000 stuck around past the 3-month free trial. So you have $2 billion. You've got some of the greatest content creators in the world on this platform. And no one wanted to pay for it. No one used it. There was an article a few days ago or a few weeks ago that Quibby's exploring strategic options, which means they're looking to sell or looking to shut down. And that really everyone involved with Quibby has sort of accepted that this failed. And that's okay. Innovations fail. That's okay. But what we really want to do here is unpack what are some of the assumptions they were making. And so Dr. Lim put a note in the chat about Meg Whitman putting her house up for sale, which is an interesting anecdote. Be curious to see how long Quibby sort of stays in business. So it's a fun quote. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Probably not actually by Mark Twain, which just adds a little bit of fun to that quote. So we have our value proposition here that we talked about, but here's sort of the 4 core assumptions I want to talk about here, and that we'll kind of dive into a little bit, because these are sort of 4 buckets of assumptions where a lot of innovations and value propositions sort of fall away. The first one, which really connects the customer with the problem, is it really a burning problem? Andrea mentioned that solutions should be solvable and scalable and significant. And this really comes back to, is it really a significant problem? Are there people that are really actually feeling this problem besides yourself? Is it a small annoyance, or is it a real substantive problem? I would say that probably 50% or higher of the innovators that we see not get the traction that they're looking for. It comes back to this idea of, are they solving a big enough problem? Is it a problem for a lot of people, or is it really a problem for such a small subset or such a minor problem that really it doesn't matter? So really understanding, unpacking whether it really is a burning problem. The second, connecting sort of solution and problem. Does the solution solve the problem? And so this is a really kind of obvious one. You're kind of looking at this saying like, well, of course, why would I be doing something that didn't actually solve the problem? Oftentimes innovators will start with a solution and try and back into a problem. And they won't necessarily realize what the exact problem is that they're trying to solve and whether their solution is sufficient to solve that problem, or whether it actually creates new problems. So I'll give you an example. We're working with an entrepreneur now who is creating an app that's about interacting in a more positive way with your phone. And what we're learning is it's a really great app, but it's not enough to create behavior change. And there's more that needs to go into the solution to actually solve the problem that he's identified. So we're beefing up this solution box to really solve the problem. The inverse of that is we worked with an entrepreneur about 2 years ago, right when I started at Magnet, that was creating a product that was supposed to make it safer for you to cut your lawn. It was sort of a screen guard for you to protect others while you were edging your grass. And it worked. It solved that problem. It made it safer. We could argue about whether or not it was a burning problem, but specifically in terms of whether or not it actually solved the problem, it did, but it created about 20 new problems. It was really heavy, which led to potential injury that way, maybe not quite as safe. It took a lot of time to set up. So now you're out in the sun for even longer. It was just a pain in the butt to use. So it made your whole experience so much worse. So it solved the one problem, but it created a dozen other problems. It didn't fit in your garage. Like, it created all sorts of other problems that made that one problem, which we don't even know if it was fully a problem, really a challenge. Next one is the team and solution bucket. Can your team deliver the solution? And can they deliver it in some sort of financially viable way? This is often what people come to Magnet looking for, is this, can we actually manufacture our product? Which is a really very valid concern. I'd say fewer problems sort of fall apart here than the other three categories, but this is a really valid concern. So I'll give you an example of one client we've worked with in the past. Some of you on the phone may know of this particular client, but it's an entrepreneur named Mike who's creating a product, mulch bricks, call it Smart Mulch, where at 40% of the weight and 60% of the volume. So instead, you have a small garden, instead of having a massive thing of mulch delivered to your house, you just get this nice pack of dehydrated mulch, you put it on the ground, you spray it with water, and it expands. Turns out to actually execute this at any sort of scale was incredibly not viable. It required really, really complex, heavy machinery, a lot of different process parts, a ton of money to actually do this. So he identified there was a problem. His solution solved the problem. He was able to actually pre-sell some of the product, but he just could not, no matter how much work we did, we couldn't find a way to actually do this in some sort of way that was financially viable. And then finally, can your team actually convert your customer? You are assuming, this a lot of our entrepreneurs that we work with make this assumption. You are assuming, as an innovator, that you've got a great idea. And that if you've got a great idea, that's enough for people to pay you money for your product. And that's just not always true, right? There are thousands of great products that have failed because people just didn't know about them. They didn't know to go to their website and look for them. They weren't, Googling specific search terms and knowing what to find. There is a real dedicated effort required to sort of convert your customer. We talk a lot about this idea of will versus would. You're talking to customers about your product and they say, I would buy that if you had that. Very rarely does that actually come through. We try and do assessments to understand if people will pay for products. Will they actually put out cash or Venmo you to understand if your product is real? I'll give you an example. We worked with a client that was creating a lid for showers to convert your traditional sort of stall shower into a steam shower to create sort of that steam experience at home. And he talked to over 400 people during his customer discovery work. And they all said they'd buy it. He said almost everyone he talked to said they would buy it. So we built him some prototypes and we put up a website and we worked with professional marketers to drive traffic to that website. And not a single purchase happened. We lowered the price, no purchase. We lowered the price again, still no purchase. A ton of traffic, but no one actually wanted the product. He could not get his customer to actually shell out money for what it was he was trying to do. So if you looked at his value proposition, it made sense. But when you actually unpacked some of these assumptions, he was making the assumption that people would buy this, and he couldn't come through on that. So how does that relate to Quibby? So coming back to Quibby here. Again, great looking value proposition on the face of it. When you start to think about sort of the assumptions they're making, if you start in this left-hand area, is this a burning problem? I don't know. Is it a burning problem that commuters don't have enough time to watch full shows? Maybe. I don't know. It could be, but we don't have evidence to suggest that it is. And we're always looking for evidence. I should have mentioned that in the previous slide. Our goal is always to find evidence for these assumptions. It's really easy to say, yeah, I think people would buy that, or I think I can do that, or yeah, no, I've heard that this is a problem. We always look for evidence for these assumptions. So what is their evidence that commuters were looking for a new way to watch television shows, and that the reason they weren't on Netflix or was because that the orientation of their phone wasn't right and the shows were too short? I don't know. So people don't have time to watch full shows. Were short chapter-like shows with top Hollywood content really what people were looking for? Did that solve their problem? So people don't have enough time to watch shows. Does having shorter shows actually do that? I don't know. Ryan has a really good point in the comments, which I'll touch on. One part of their solution that was lacking was you couldn't take screenshots. You couldn't put it on, you couldn't even use Chromecast or certain products to watch it on your television. They were very adamant that you only had to watch it on your phone. And it made sort of the idea of creating virality really difficult. They also sort of went away from the model that Netflix and Hulu and others had adopted of releasing all of their shows at once, to sort of trying to create sort of releasing them one at a time, sort of a drip over the course of weeks for each individual television show. So you couldn't have sort of this binge type effect of watching these shows and creating a community around these shows, which is so that's exactly right. They really did struggle with that. Could the team actually deliver the solution? Technologically, they could. They had the money to do it, but they didn't really nail the content that people were necessarily looking for. And then could you convert your customer? They very clearly struggled to do that. And for a lot of the reasons that Ryan called out in the chat, they could not get, despite all of the capital, despite all of sort of the business expertise, despite, having, world-class creators creating shows, they couldn't convert their customers, right? They had 910,000 free trial subscribers, and 72,000 actually went through, which is a real challenge. So I'll pause there. So Dr. Lim had a really good question in the chat. Would it be useful to offer your product as a pre-order as an indication of whether your product will sell? Absolutely. So that is one of the ways that we can test whether people will actually want a product. And specifically with physical products where it can be really expensive to make those products, pre-ordering is a great way. There are a couple of other ways that we've seen people do it. For example, we've seen folks put up a website and click buy now, like have a buy now button before they had a product ready. And then when you click buy now, it would say sold out, join our mailing list. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't quite as good as pre-buying because you didn't necessarily get the capital in, but it was a way to understand, okay, if Andrea or Doug are going to go through the process of going to a website and clicking buy now, we can imagine or have a better sense of confidence that when we actually do launch the product, the people that hit that buy now button are actually will want to go forward, actually make that purchase. So yeah, that's definitely something you can do. So with that said, I will actually hop across a few slides just in the interest of time.
And I think, Alec, just one good thing to point out too is as you're going through and you're finding proof and you're experimenting, pivoting is definitely something that we encourage people to do. So we had an entrepreneur who had a heated mouse pad, and his thought was, you know, so often office spaces are cold. This will help keep people warm. And as he was doing his customer discovery, one of the things that seemed to start to bubble up was it wasn't exactly perfect for the office environment, but a lot of people that were also gamers at home talked about how cold their hands got in the evening when they were gaming, or especially if they were in an area that was cold because of all the computer needs and things like that. So that entrepreneur was able to pivot and really focus on that specific market. So they changed who that customer target was. And that's really the goal of going through this VPM. You don't go through it once, you don't go through the assumptions once, but you just keep hitting it and iterating on it. And it's part of why we're called the iterator, to really get to that point where you feel comfortable and you're ready to make those resource investments.
Yeah, that's a wonderful call out, Andrea. I don't think I've ever worked with an entrepreneur where the value proposition they came in with was exactly what it was when they actually went to market. These things are always changing, and it's always a process, because they're all interconnected, that if you change one, so you change your customer, you really need to reevaluate. Can you convert your customer, and is it a burning problem? If you change your solution, you really need to evaluate, does it still solve the problem? And can you still deliver it in a financially viable way? It's really important to, as you're iterating, which is what this is all about, testing and learning, testing these assumptions and then going out and trying to validate them. And if you learn that it's validated, great, keep moving on. If you don't validate it, it's time for a pivot and continuing to go through that cycle. So we think, and I'll close on this slide just to leave it for a few minutes for questions. We think there are four verbs we use to think about how we actually go out and validate these assumptions. So for is it a burning problem, we go out and listen. So this is about listening to your customer. It's about conducting surveys. It's about having focus groups. It's really about research. It's about learning as much as you can about the problem and the customer. The best way to do this, though, with all those three resources are all great, but having one-on-one conversations, actually talking to people, the concept of getting outside your four walls, going and talking to folks and asking them to tell you stories about the problem they're having. Tell me about a time when you were really cold in your office. Tell me about it, how you deal with it when it gets cold. Asking people to give you stories is really powerful. When we evaluate whether the solution solves the problem, we're talking about building prototypes here. Can we build a prototype and just see if our solution works? So for the map that Andrea was talking about for gamers, why don't we just make some prototypes and give them to people and see if it actually heats them up, see if it improves performance, see if they actually solves the problem that we've said we're going to solve. It doesn't need to look perfect or be exactly what it is that we're trying to do, but we're trying to understand whether the solution we're creating has the potential to solve the problem that we want to solve. When we talk about delivering the solution, we talk about organizing resources. So how do you get everything in order? How do you create a supply chain and a manufacturing plan? How do you find a board of advisors? How do you go raise money and have a pitch deck? How do you have sort of your financial model and everything like that in order? How do you have your intellectual property done? Founders agreements and everything like that. That's all in this organized bucket. How do you organize your resources as a team to make sure you can deliver that solution in some sort of financially viable way? And finally, can you convert your customer? For us, this is all about selling. The end goal being to sell a product and getting money back. But to Dr. Lim's point, pre-orders, test and buy. So if you've got one product, we're doing this right now. We've got an entrepreneur that's got a creating an exercise device. So if anyone's looking to try out an exercise device, let us know. It's like an all-in-one exercise device, but he's only got 3 prototypes because it costs so much to make. So one thing we've talked about is try and buy. So we're going to give this to people, let them use it for 2 weeks, and if they want it, they pay us for it. So a lower risk way of understanding if people actually want to pay for a particular product. So we sped through some stuff here at the end because I wanted to leave questions or leave time should there be any questions. But really for us, the value proposition in articulating value is a really great starting point to unpack the assumptions that you're making about whether it's a problem, whether the solution solves the problem, whether you deliver it, and can you convert? Because it leads us down a pathway of, okay, what do I do next? An organized way to think about, should I be listening to customers right now? Should I be building product? Should I be organizing resources or trying to sell? And it's not always linear, and it's not checkbox, I'm done. You don't listen to customers and then move on. You're always listening to customers, and you're always iterating on your product, and you're always thinking about how to sell and how to organize. So it's not linear. It is an iterative process. But this is just one framework that we found that's been really great for us to use with the clients that we work with to help them think about how they articulate value and think about the guesses that they're making. So, Andrea, anything you wanted to add to that?
I think we've pretty much hit everything.
Great. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or not, but figured we'd leave a few minutes in case there were questions either about what we presented or about your specific business. If not, that's okay too, but just wanted to make sure there was some time should you all have any questions. What are other ways to determine whether my idea will actually be something people will pay for? That's a great question. And some of it depends on what your idea is. Pre-orders are always a great way, especially with physical products. These smoke tests where you do put up these websites and see if people will click. Ad response is a big one. Ad response is something that, you put up ads and see if people are clicking on them. What rate are you actually getting conversions? A lot of it is using digital tools to drive people to websites and then seeing how that goes. I wish there was a better way. Marketing and sales is so difficult that we've actually been recruiting a number of different marketing firms to do these testing for the clients that we work with, because it can be so difficult. The Facebook algorithms and the Google algorithms are always changing. There's no great one way to do it. I don't know, Andrew, do you have anything else you think about there?
I think this would be a good point to kind of point out the difference between a prototype and an MVP. So a prototype is, if you're looking at our framework on the bottom, it's about building and it's about testing structurally what the difference is, whether that problem is solved by that solution. So it often takes for us, when we're building physical products, it's an actual physical prototype. Whereas an MVP is a lot of times what you use when you're testing selling, and that doesn't always have to be something physical. To your point, Alec, it could be the pre-sales, or it could even be just really creative ways to go about it. If you're familiar with Zappos, the shoe store, they set up a website, but they were buying all their shoes from a specific store. So they were featuring shoes that were actually at a different store just to test the idea if people would buy shoes online. And so then if they got an order, they'd run down to the store and they'd go buy it. So thinking really creatively about how to test that selling part of the equation is really, it can be really fun to think about new ways to do that.
So Bob asked, how's Battle Toss doing? So Battle Toss is a game that actually started in the ThinkBox. I don't have it in my office with me anymore, but it's a combination of Connect 4, Beer Pong, and Plinko. And the entrepreneur's name is Russell, came to Magnet wanting to make this product out of plastic. And we did some initial looking, and it was like $300,000 to create the plastic molds for this product. But we didn't know if he was solving a real problem and whether the solution solved the problem, where they can convert his customer. So there are all these assumptions, and he was just going to go forward with this $300,000 purchase. So he started doing some listening. He went to a bunch of different picnics in corporate events to understand problems that people were having. If I remember correctly, the problem he identified was there's no sort of family-friendly game that works for a lot of different ages. Cornhole being sort of an analogous product, but I'm not going to play against a 4-year-old. It's just a different thing. This is a game that everyone can play and still have fun with. So he made prototypes at ThinkBox out of wood. They did not look like you could sell them. They were just to understand if people liked them. Then he made a next version out of nicer wood and sort of iterated on this until he got to the point where it could really be considered a minimum viable product, a nice enough product that he could go out and try and sell. Not a perfect product. Every product had some flaws in it. It didn't ship well. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough that he could test whether people would pay for it. So we worked with a marketing firm in the area called Tenlo. They put up a website for him. They did a digital marketing campaign and drove a ton of traffic to his website to see if people would be willing to pay. We also had events where we could show the product. We actually, when you can do things in person, we had physical events with the product. And he never built up inventory. This is very much a just-in-time type production, or he built a handful of units at a time, nothing major. So leaning into this investment. And he found people loved it. No matter what price point he had, people were still willing to buy it. So it was very clear he could get his customer to pay for this. He was selling out on Amazon. He has sales to all 50 states. The challenge came back to the organized side. Was there enough capital to actually do this? Could you do it in a financially viable way out of wood? So Bob, to answer your question, a long way to answer your question, he's still selling them. He's selling them mostly sort of at craft marts or holiday shows. Has not really wanted to put in the big sort of investment that might be required to scale up. But he's doing well. So yeah, the one other question I just saw there was from Robert. Sorry, now I'm scrolling through my screen here. So that is actually on our strategic roadmap. How do we better connect entrepreneurs with investors, and how do we better connect solutions with problems? This is a really big one. I mentioned that so many of these initiatives fall apart because we're not solving real problems, and when you go, you really don't know if it's a burning problem. But there are very clearly burning problems out there in the ether that need solving, and innovators that are in search of those problems. So certainly something we've actually talked about a lot and would like to do is help uncover those problems that folks are having, and then find the innovators that are out there that are either currently solving them, or they're looking for their next, entrepreneurial venture and want to go try and solve them. Well, great. Well, thank you all for your time. It's always fun to talk about what we do and share fun examples. Doug, should I just turn it back to you?
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Thank you so much, Alec and Andrea, for presenting today. And it's always great when we can have our partners at Magnet join us and share a little bit about their expertise.